Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and we're the folks behind abarabove.com, the ultimate resource for craft bartenders, bar operators, and just about anybody else looking to make great craft drinks.
I'm a bar consultant with more than 10 years of industry experience.
And I run abarabove.com, bringing weekly articles and cocktail recipes to help you make great drinks and grow your career behind the bar. Welcome to episode number 91. And this week we're talking about one of the biggest challenges that we see industry folks facing, trying to date or have a family with somebody outside the hospitality industry. With the variable schedule and odd hours that come with a hospitality job, it can be extremely difficult to date someone who's working the standard Monday through Friday 9-to-5 job. This week we're talking a bit about how Chris and I managed it, along with some ideas for how you might be able to make it work. That said, this is really, really tough. For anybody out there who's tackled this and made it work, I'd love to hear how you did it. Let us know in the comments over at mixologytalk.com/91. By the way, this podcast episode is sponsored by Q Drinks, a craft mixer company based out of New York. We're seeing a lot of great new craft mixers coming on the market recently, and I've been really impressed with the quality, carbonation level, and flavor profile of Q Drinks tonic, grapefruit, and ginger beer mixers, along with the rest of their portfolio. They're made with real, carefully chosen ingredients and designed to let you create a complete balanced cocktail with just their mixers and your spirit of choice. So thanks again to Q Drinks for sponsoring this podcast. So there's no question that working as a bartender and dating somebody who's working in a corporate 9-to-5 job is tricky.
Yeah, it is very, very difficult, and it is its own challenge.
Yeah, we've got experience in this one, actually. When Chris and I started dating, I was working your standard 9-to-5, and he was working in a bar.
Yeah.
And it was really, really hard.
Yeah, and it actually kind of got worse after it got better, or
That's
before
for sure.
it got better.
That's for sure.
So just kind of a high-level overview of everything. We started dating when you were a consultant, and I was a bar manager.
Yeah, that was almost easier because my schedule was I would fly out to a consulting client, be there 4 or 5 days a week, and then come back at the end of the week. So it wasn't so bad. We kind of expected to be apart.
Right. And then after that bar manager job, I moved to San Francisco, help open a restaurant.
Work 24 hours a day.
Just absolutely crazy hours.
Craziness.
And then went back into bartending after that.
Exactly. And this is kind of because of this challenge that all of these changes happen for us. And so I think maybe today we could just talk a little bit about what we learned along the way, some tips, and maybe some things we did poorly that you should avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Julie mentioned in the intro, we'd love to hear from you, everyone, because this is a really significant challenge. And if you've done it, please let us know how you went about it so that other people can kind of learn from you too.
Absolutely. And I think it really depends on the role that you have that'll decide what your schedule looks like, how much flexibility you have, and all of that. So maybe first we can talk a little bit about just the role of the bartender and some ways that you can be a little bit flexible about your schedule.
Yeah. And I think this is kind of the most difficult thing that you're going to run into is your time. Just because you guys work opposite hours and all that, being very deliberate about managing your time is one great way to make sure that you have time to see each other.
Exactly. I think it's really, really tricky because your standard bartender hours are starting at, say, 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon and getting home at, midnight to 2. Unfortunately, you're going to be sleeping during the day to make up some of those hours, and you just end up never, ever seeing the person that you're having a relationship with.
Right. And if you're working in a nightclub, as I'm sure some of you are, those hours are even worse. You get off, you go to work at 7 o'clock and you get off at 4 in the morning or something like that.
It's truly opposite. Yeah. You can have dinner, breakfast together.
Right. 2 ships passing in the night is what it can seem like for sure. But like I said, really be specific about your time. Is if there's a way that you could switch some of your shifts around. If you don't need to work 5 shifts a week, maybe you cut them down to 4 shifts. Maybe you start to really engineer your schedules to optimize the time you get to spend with your significant other. That's kind of one of the things that we did pretty quickly.
Yeah. And really, I think it's important to note that I don't think it should be completely on the shoulders of the hospitality person to rearrange their schedule. I think that you probably deal with enough with the hassle of your schedule. It kind of stinks that you have to accommodate. But I'll also admit that your 9 to 5 schedule is often not very flexible. However, nowadays, I'm definitely seeing some employers having some flexibility. So for the person who's working your standard schedule, I think it's worth having a conversation. There are places now that offer flex schedules where you can work 4 10-hour days, or maybe you can work Tuesday through Saturday and share Monday together. It's worth having the conversation because I definitely do see some flexibility starting to appear in these kinds of roles.
Yeah, and a lot of people are actually being asked to work from home 1 day a week too, just to kind of help down, with commuting and all that stuff.
That's very true. That definitely does happen. And that would be absolutely worth a conversation. But of course, you do have to actually work.
One of the other things you can do to be really deliberate about your time is to keep a common calendar. This is really easy to do with Google these days, pretty much any calendar service.
Yeah, and I think the real key here is to keep it updated. Unfortunately, with the wacky schedules, it can be really hard to predict when you're going to be available, when you're not. I remember when we were dating, I would want to schedule something on, a Sunday morning when you wouldn't usually be working, and I'd have to wait to see you again to be able to schedule it because I wasn't sure if you'd be available. So having that common calendar, especially now when it's so easy to do, is really, really valuable. Yeah,
absolutely. And keep it updated. I know that one of the troubles that we have in the industry is getting our schedules on time. So if you have, your schedule, just post it on the calendar and keep it up to date as much as you possibly can. It really is beneficial. And if you have a job where you get it a couple weeks out, that's kind of the gold. That's right gold. There.
Yeah.
So, that would be a great thing as a manager to offer your staff. I think we touched on that on how to keep staff around or something like that.
I think we did actually. Yeah, which is so true. It's hugely valuable for people to be able to manage their own personal lives that way. Now, one thing to note is, of course, if you do have a family, especially with young kids, the reverse schedule is actually not so bad. If you've got really young kids who aren't in school yet, the bartender or hospitality person can watch the kids during the day while your 9 to 5er takes them at night. However, I will say one thing, this can be really, really hard on a relationship. Talking about ships passing in the night, you're just going to be handing off the kids and never really spending quality time together. So it's beneficial in that it reduces your childcare costs, but it's definitely costly on the relationship.
Yeah, and I can see a lot of kind of potential boiling up on the handoffs. If you're a 9 to 5er and you're coming straight home, typically that bartender or person in the service industry has to get to work ASAP. So I can see that being a really big point of contention. So once again, being really deliberate about managing your time is really, really critical.
Right. And if your kids are in school and you are once again working that reverse schedule, just do the math, compare your calendars and see where there are places where there's overlap and truly take advantage of them. For example, if you are going to work at 7:00 at night, maybe you could be the one to pick your kids up from school. Maybe you can spend those afternoons with them and help them with their homework. That's really, once again, it's valuable time. And if you're not really deliberate about your schedule, the time is going to disappear on you. And I think maybe that's the key message here is just plan ahead, be deliberate, and really, when you have the time, invest it.
Yeah. And one of the things I keep thinking about is even if you don't have kids, a lot of people share pets. I remember this was kind of one of the things that we did.
Oh, we did.
This schedule absolutely applies for pets as well. I know it's kind of a weird thing to say, but if you have a dog, you need to walk it and, get it out of the house. This kind of applies as well.
It's funny. We actually got the dog because we were never seeing each other and I was lonely.
Yeah. And so, this schedule was definitely applicable to that as well.
And once again, you got to plan it because if we hadn't talked ahead, that poor dog was going to suffer.
Yeah. So another thing to consider is that time after your shift. Especially if it's busy out and you're just completely, on, your natural tendency is to hang out and want to just kind of blow off some steam with your friends. But it's really important that if you're trying to manage your time and seeing the most of each other, that you take that into consideration possibly just go straight home too.
Exactly. And that's really the thing. It's just when you look at your schedule, when you see any places when you're not literally behind the bar, think about your priorities. Is it more valuable to you to spend an extra hour after your shift socializing and maybe sleeping in later in the morning and missing that hour with your kids or with your spouse? Or is that something where it's truly worth getting home, going to bed, and spending that time with your family? And of course, I'm not going to make that call for you. Sometimes you really do need to defrag, and I respect that. But think about it, prioritize it, and have that conversation with your significant other, because there's a huge risk here of your family starting to feel like they are second to your job. And if you're not really deliberate about having those conversations about what you're doing and why you're doing it, that can really cause a lot of stress.
Yeah. And this doesn't just apply to people that are in bartenders or servers. It actually becomes a lot more complicated when you're a manager, because you're expected to be there a lot. I remember when I was in a management position opening restaurants, I was working literally every day from 8 a.m. to midnight. And my relationship with family and everyone basically suffered. It's really, really hard, but it's even more important now to have some time for yourself and to have time when you're not thinking about work to spend time with your loved one.
That's a really great point, I think, too, is if you are spending so much time at the bar and then you go home and all you talk or think about is the bar, it's not really quality time with your family. And that's something that I know it can take a lot of practice, but to really focus, when you are home, both inside your head and physically.
Yeah. And for when you're dating somebody outside of the restaurant industry, they're not going to have a lot of the same mindset and kind of the same language. So it's going to be even more difficult to talk about these things, and it'd be hard to kind of convey some of the importance of what you're trying to accomplish and what you're doing.
And if you are in a management position, here are a couple of our own thoughts on how you might do it a little bit better than we did. And one of the really important things that I would say to start with is to understand the obligation that you're taking on when you take the job. Have that conversation during your interview. What are you signing up for? And then take that back to your significant other and make sure they really get it.
Yeah, and in your interview, they're probably going to tell you things like, oh, we want to respect your time, 40-hour work weeks. It's never going to happen in a managerial position. Expect at least 50 hours a week.
And see if you can have a conversation with somebody who's already working there, either in that role or at least sees the person working that role, because then you can get a little bit more data on what it's probably going to look like.
Right. So just kind of set yourself mentally about your time and what your obligations will be for time, and just physically being in the building. Expect in a managerial role, if you're doing 5 days a week, to be there 50 hours a week, pretty much.
And I will say this depends a little bit on where you work. If you're working a mom and pop restaurant where you are the bartender and the owner and the manager, your hours are going to be a little bit different than if you work at Chili's. And that's okay. And if you want something that's a schedule that's going to be a little bit more predictable, then you might want to look at working a larger, more corporate restaurant. In that position, you're more likely to have multiple managers. You're more likely to have a repeating schedule. And that's something that might make it a little bit more amenable to a relationship.
Yeah. And communicate it. I mean, I think the end of the day, communication is kind of the key. And set the expectations with your family. Like right now, I'm having this conversation with our newborn in my arms, so I'm trying to communicate to him what he should expect as well. So if you hear any little cooing in the background, that's why.
Speaking of family.
Right. But, set the expectation with your family. Why are you doing it? How long is it going to, is this going to be a career, or is this just something in the middle to pay your bills, and have those kinds of conversations in advance.
And I would be really careful here, because if you interview for a job and they say, oh, yeah, it's going to be, 40 hours a week. Exactly. You'll never work any overtime. You go home and tell your spouse that. And then guess what? It's not like that.
Yeah.
That's going to be a problem. You're going to feel bad, and they're going to probably feel pretty bad about it too. So don't only set expectations based on what you're told, but based on reality. Do the homework, figure out what's really going to happen, and have that conversation. But I think the other thing that Chris mentioned that's really important is the why. Because if you're moving into a managerial role and working extra hard because you want to make more money for your family and have a better career so that you can invest in your future, say that out loud. Tell your spouse, because that is, I mean, you're doing it for them. And if they don't know that, it can be really, really hard.
Yeah. And one of the other things that you may want to consider and really put some thought into is, do you really want to be a manager? Is this part of your long-term career plan? Because you're going to make some sacrifices in the short term for that long-term goal.
And I think that a lot of people assume that being a manager is an inherently better position than being a bartender. I think when you look at corporate jobs, being a manager is a step up the ladder. It's more money. It's maybe more vacation. It's all that sort of thing. But it's kind of counterintuitive for this industry, which was a surprise for me. Being a manager often means longer hours. It can sometimes mean a significant pay cut, and it often means a lot less vacation.
Yeah. So, just some things to consider. When you're thinking about taking that next step, being a manager, if it doesn't align with your long-term career plans or anything like that, it might not be the best move for you.
Yeah, there actually was a time in Chris's career when he made the decision to stop being a manager and go back to a bartender role, and it was really good for us financially.
Yeah, and for time and everything else, there was so many other benefits. Emotionally, the benefits were pretty amazing emotionally as well.
I can attest to that. So just something to think about. You may be making an assumption like we did, that being a manager is inherently better role in a lot of ways, and it might not be the case.
Now, there's a couple other roles that you can take if you're a bartender and you want to start to think about those next steps in your career. It doesn't always have to be bar manager, general manager,
opening your own restaurant.
Right. There's a lot of things that can kind of segue off of a career in bartending.
Yeah, and a lot of these have 9 to 5 hours.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of the benefits. So one of the roles you can really look into is a sales role. We interact with salespeople every single day, and if you build that relationship with them, this could be a really great opportunity for you to kind of take that next step and go into a little bit more of a 9 to 5 role in a sales job.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing you can do is something Chris did, which is to work the lunch shift. I know that this can be problematic. It really depends on your location and your bar. But Chris was actually working at a bar in the financial district of San Francisco, and it was very busy during the lunch shift, and it ended up being pretty close to a 9 to 5 job. Yeah,
and the benefit, the biggest benefit was I almost made just as much money on my night shift or my lunch shift as I did at working nights, because I didn't have to split my tips. I didn't have a bar back. So, all the money I took in pretty much was mine, and then, tipped out from the service. So I actually did really, really well. And I did that until, just a couple of years ago when I left the bar role.
Plus, you can make a mean iced tea.
That and Arnold Palmer's, I got that stuff down. And if you wanted to stay in the industry, there are some career paths that you can take that will take a little bit longer for you to get there, but they could definitely fill out in a 9 to 5 role. Now, if you're currently a manager or a general manager, this might make a lot of sense for you. So one of the things you can do is go into a director of operations for a larger company, a hotel chain, for example, and manage, their entire beverage and food program. That's more along the lines of a 9 to 5 role. Not really, but it can be. So that could be another consideration you make when you're thinking about long-term career paths to look at.
And I would imagine there are quite a few roles in the hotel world around sort of events planning. I know back when I had my 9 to 5 job, we would have big corporate events in hotels, and there was a tremendous amount of work involved. So I can only imagine there are definitely some roles there. They're probably less focused on specific bar roles and more on the events as a whole. But again, that might be something that is more of your daytime schedule.
Yeah. Now, the next thing we're really kind of is one of the sticking points of dating somebody outside of the industry is managing perception. And that is, if somebody's in a professional role and they're dating somebody that works as a bartender or a server, there's a lot of kind of perception problems with that. What are you going to do long term? Those kinds of things. So
what's your real job?
Kind of. And it's something that you should be aware of and just be prepared for.
Exactly. I think that that's something that I think we had a little bit of a challenge with, because I think in the beginning when we were first dating, I went to my parents and told them I was dating a bartender, and there was a little bit of raised eyebrows.
Yeah, it's a bit of a stigma. I think, I'm very proud of my career. I love what I do. And I'm sure many of us that are listening to this podcast are as well. But it's hard to convey what that means actually to somebody that is not inside the industry. Things have changed considerably in the last 5-10 years where, I know a lot of people making six figures in San Francisco tending bar, and it's a long-term career path.
Yeah, I don't know why, but bartending has this reputation of being a dead-end job, and it's not necessarily the case anymore. And I think as the bartender, unfortunately, you're going to shoulder some of those perceptions, but I would just say be prepared. Not just, obviously, if you're dating somebody, they're probably past that point. They probably think enough of you. But if you're meeting their family, if you're talking to your family, perhaps.
Or if you're at a cocktail party and your significant other has to introduce you, that could also have some weight as well. Great
point. Yeah, exactly. And just be able to speak to it and talk about, what you do and why it matters to you and why it's not, quote, just a bartending role.
Yeah. And here's a couple ways to kind of really manage those perceptions. The first one is to have a long-term goal that you can speak about. Do you want to own your own restaurant one day? Do you want to go into sales? What is your long-term vision of why you're in this industry? And really let people know why you're doing it.
And honestly, if bartending really is just a transitional job while you work your way through law school, that's fine too. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. But I think that it's really around communication.
Yeah, and don't be stagnant. If you have those long-term goals, because everybody talks the talk, as they say, be actively moving towards it all the time. If you have a long-term goal of owning your own restaurant, put a timeline on it. Like within 5 years, I want to own my own restaurant, and then know how you're going to get there. Because if you just have an idea, you're going to get stagnant. You're not going to move anywhere. And there's going to be a little bit of resentment like 5 years down the road. If you haven't made any traction, but you always want to talk about opening your own restaurant, it's going to get pretty old.
And I think your spouse might struggle with that too. If you say, I want to own my own restaurant, it's going to take me 10 years. Here are the 10 steps that are between here and there. And your spouse can see that progress. That's going to be a lot more motivating for them to put up with the challenging schedule along the way, as opposed to someday I'm going to open a restaurant and 10 years later, I still have a crummy shift and awful hours and it's really hard. That's pretty different.
Yeah, very different.
By the way, I wanted to close this conversation with one thing here. I feel like there's a lot of negativity in this episode, but being in this industry isn't all bad, obviously. If it was all bad, we wouldn't have this podcast and we wouldn't be in it either.
Right.
But one thing to point out that your partner may not know, and I didn't know before I was dating Chris, is that there are some serious perks to being in the hospitality industry.
Oh, absolutely. Being in this industry or, in the area that you bartend in, you work in that geographic area, you probably know a lot of people. There's many restaurants that you walk into and you didn't know you were going to know somebody in there, but then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I used to bar back with that guy 5 years ago. And next thing you know, you're sitting at the bar, you're having a great time. And this is gold when you're dating somebody outside of the industry.
I can't agree more. I can't tell you how many free desserts that I have consumed. It's not good for my waistline, but oh man.
Well, and just the level of camaraderie and friendship and all that stuff. I mean, you go to as a consumer, if you walk into a restaurant and you don't know anybody, it's a very, very different experience if you know the bartender and they're super outgoing and they kind of roll the red carpet out for you. We know how we treat our friends when they come into our restaurants. This is absolutely magic when you're dating.
It's so true. And I think that it really shows the benefit of working in this industry. It's not just hard hours. It's this camaraderie. It's this, this culture that you get to be a part of. And I think that that's a huge benefit that you can really speak to. And frankly, you can show your date when the time comes. To your point, Chris, it's not all about free food, but I can remember early on when we were dating, we would go into a restaurant and you would coincidentally know somebody And it made the experience so much warmer, so much more friendly. And it was just a really fun experience. Do you remember that one time in France?
Oh, this was amazing. So this was the first time we traveled kind of as we were dating. We were in a relationship for about a year. And this was the first time I traveled with their parents. And we weren't married at this point. And I was managing this little restaurant. And the owner had another restaurant in France, a beautiful restaurant. And he said, by all means, please go there. I want you to, just check it out. And I said, okay, no problem. So we get there and I have no idea what's going on. And
we don't speak French, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely no French. We check in and the hostess's eyes light up when I told her who I am, my name. And this was probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's not like they recognized us from the podcast.
No, nothing. No, I mean, there's no way she would have recognized me. So we go into the restaurant, and it's 3 stories. It's a beautiful restaurant. I mean, they have their own ranch or something.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. The ceiling actually opens up during the summer. It's just breathtaking.
It was a beautiful restaurant.
So we get there, and they take care of us, and we're looking at the prices, and this is all in euro. And it was incredibly expensive at the time.
It was a very nice restaurant.
Very, very nice restaurant. So we started taking a look. I started taking a look at the prices, and I didn't know what we were going to do because do I pay? Do her parents feel obligated to pay?
It was a little awkward. I think there was definitely an awkward pause there where we weren't quite sure how to play it. But then the waiter arrived.
Right. And this meal could easily have been $500.
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt. I'm just by blinking an eye, it could have been $500. So, we all kind of discussed, we're just going to get entrees and a glass of champagne. So we sit down and we tell the waiter our order, and he's like, oh, okay, but do you mind if I bring anybody like oysters? And I'm like, well, yeah, I like oysters. And anybody cheese? And I'm like, okay, yeah, cheese. And he's like, well, allow me to take care of you.
He said something I'll never forget, which I thought was funny. And not to digress too much, he said, the owner has given me the white card.
And we just kind of all shook our head like, oh, okay, yeah, that's great.
The white card. What on earth does that mean?
Talking about it, the guy left, and he took our entree orders and giving us kind of his talk. And then when he left and we talked about it for a few minutes, I think it was your father that says,
it dawned on us.
Oh my God, we have carte blanche.
Carte blanche, the white card.
And that night just proceeded to be one of the most amazing culinary and hospitality experiences I've ever had.
Yeah, I think the only thing we chose was the entrees, and the waiter brought
everything.
Many courses.
I think we all started off with curry royales, followed by oysters, followed by cheese and pate. He picked out a Chateauneuf de Pape, and then we had entrees, and then we had dessert wine, and then we had dessert.
It was incredible.
It was absolutely, and coffee. I think we even had like espresso and coffee at the end.
Let's just say my parents were pretty okay with Chris's career at the end of this meal.
And the best part was when they brought the check, because I was gasping. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be a bartender the rest of my life to pay for this meal. He slid the check over to me, and I looked at the other side of it, and all it says was thank you. And a smiley face. It was
as big fat zero that he'd turned into a smiley face.
Yeah, so I mean, just absolutely, the white card was handed to us.
You can imagine the tip we left.
So our point is, being in the hospitality industry has its perks. We get to see the best form of hospitality there is, and being able to share that with somebody outside of our industry, that it's so eye opening. It's golden.
Exactly. And I think that's the other side of things. It's just we do have an amazing perspective on the other side of the house. And so we can share that a little bit and let people see that it's not all bad. I think that unfortunately there is definitely some negative connotation to a hospitality role, which I do hope we are doing our part to change. And I hope that the sort of recent craft movement is helping to change. But in the meantime, show folks what it's like. Show them great hospitality, and I think it'll make a big difference.
Absolutely.
There's no two ways about it. It's really hard to date, have a relationship, or raise a family while working in a hospitality role. But it can definitely be done. Hopefully we gave a few tips that will help you if you find yourself in this position. Of course, as always, we don't know everything, and we'd love to hear your tips as well. Head on over to the show notes at mixologytalk.com/91 and let us know how you're making it work.
And by the way, if you're an owner-operator and you're finding yourself spending a lot more time at the bar than you really want to, I may be able to help. I've been working as a bar consultant over the last few years, and I specialize in building systems and optimizing processes to increase profitability and also get you home a lot earlier. I work with folks from all over the world, so if you're interested, reach out at barabove.com/services, and we can definitely chat.
I hope this episode has given you a few tips to bring home, and we'll catch you in a couple weeks. Cheers.
Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.